Today is January 26, 2021. My name is Angie. I'm interviewing Matt Manalo on the special collection about Houston arts and culture scene. Thank you so much, Matt, for taking part in speaking to us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always a
Yeah,
pleasure to be working with y'all and with Rice University. So I'm
yeah,
glad to be here.
absolutely. Thank you. Amazing. To start, can you briefly introduce yourself for those of us who haven't met you?
My name is Matt Manalo. I'm an artist and a community organizer. I founded Philippine X Artists of Houston in 2019, and also almost at the same time, I started a community-based project called the A-Leaf Art House, which is basically a shipping container turned into a community um, workspace or a gallery um, in the heart of Alief, which is also considered as the most diverse district in Houston. Um, and also, I'm a full-time artist, a dad, and a husband. What else? I'm a first-generation immigrant. Uh, I came here in 2004 from Manila, Philippines, and I also received my Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Painting from the University of Houston.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really want to thank you for um, building the Asian art scene, Asian American art scene in Houston as the founding father of Filipinx Artists Group. Um, yeah, could you speak a little bit about the intention behind that initiative?
With Philippine X Artists of Houston, it was more of kind of like a personal need for me. Um, I've been an artist for more than 10 years, and before 2019, I've always been looking for a community, a Filipino creative community, and unfortunately, there wasn't any. I wanted to start just having a collective of painters, but then it never happened really. And um, and from that need of wanting to be part of something that was also centered on being a Filipino immigrant or the Filipino story or sharing that. Um, yeah, I mean, it it really just kind of happened because I was already in conversation with a lot of folks about it, um, who I've known, but then we never really had the opportunity to, or the space to be able to just gather. Um, of course, 2019, it was completely different at that time, and it was just easy to just invite everyone and be able to gather. Um, and so during the Asia Society of Texas had an art show in 2019 as well, and it was a bunch of Filipino artists from New York, San Francisco, who were being showcased there. And it so happened that um, one of the artists that was part of it, and she was there at she came here to Houston. So I met her and she introduced me to Bridget. And, and when I introduced myself to Bridget, I told her that, hey, there are also Filipino artists here who would want to be, showcased by Asia Society, especially that, they're known as Asia Society. So, and I noticed that they don't really showcase a lot of Filipino artists. Um, and so that's how the conversation basically started. And Bridget was very kind to allow us to meet there. So the first meeting was at Asia Society, and it was great. And the rest was history. And it turns out that a lot of Filipino artists were also looking for like a community that we can work with, that we can collaborate with, that we could share interests with. And now we've kind of like branched off into like smaller communities where, you know, where Filipinos are also involved, which is great, you know, just using our talents to um, help the communities as well, like especially during this time with the pandemic going on.
Yeah, following up on our earlier conversation, like with the collaboration with Bridget on your, I mean, the latest show, Artists on Site, which just finished this weekend. Can
Mhm.
you talk a little bit about that? How Asia Society has collaborated with the Filipinx artists in Houston?
Um, Bridget and I have already kind of like gone back and forth with this whole idea of possibly turning some of the gallery space into kind of like a working studio, and be able to have the artists make their work and be able to invite um, people to see them working. So it was already kind of like an ongoing conversation, and um, because of the pandemic, they were able to free up some of their programming schedule, and so it allowed Asia Society to um, have this time and space for this project for Artists on Site. And so once Bridget was able to kind of like finalize that with their programming, she reached out to me and Ashley DeHoyos to come up with a list of artists that we thought would be best candidates to be part of it. So I made my list. Of course, I included, you know, Filipino artists as well. Um, and you know, one of them was Royal. Um, and then, you know, I also listed Ara and Brandon. Um, and it was great, you know, like having three of my artists make it um, to be able to use the space and showcase their work. Um, so yeah, in that way, we were able to kind of collaborate and be able to give opportunities to these artists who really deserve. You know, I was having a conversation with Ara, and I was surprised because I've always been a fan of her work, but I've never met her in person. And and she had told me that she hasn't really shown, you know, in a gallery before or a museum. So it was really exciting for me that I was able to, you know, help her in that way, to like put a spotlight on her practice. Um, and even for Royal, you know, it was it was an opportunity for her to be able to share her story, and be able to also work in a new media, which is, you know, doing installation. So it was a really great feeling to be able to kind of like pull people in, and and give opportunities. Um, you know, and that was like really the main goal of Philippine X Arts of Houston, and then as well as Alief Art House. So for me, being able to provide spaces for all these artists who I believe that really deserve it is like such a great feeling to me. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree, and the amazing works you've done, and also navigating the question around identity and art and creativity. I'm curious for yourself, and I guess for many of the artists as well. Like, how often do you identify as Filipino or Filipino American artists in your work? And were there any um, circumstance that you wouldn't want to be identified as Filipino by any chance?
Um, in my work, I have this belief that if the artist who makes the work is Filipino, then it's also um, a work about being Filipino and their identity, even if they don't want to um, make that um, um, obvious with their work. I feel like it's still Filipino work, regardless of like that whole idea that they're not really talking about identity, because um, because you can't really just make work without a type of inspiration or a story. And I believe that um, we as Filipinos or as people of color um, have very unique stories in our own, or being part of like the Asian diaspora. I think we have very different stories that were or experiences that we have ever since we got here or we were born, and it still comes out. No matter how much running away we do, it still comes out no matter what, in terms of like maybe color choices, or let's say like the color yellow is apparent in somebody's work, but then that color yellow was actually really inspired by something that maybe my mother, who that was her favorite color, and that was something that was very apparent in my you know um immigrant household growing up. So there's some kind of inspiration there that still talks about identity, I believe. um um as for my personal work, uh it's something that I always talk about, and it's I always try to make it very obvious that it is about identity, but it's also about my personal experiences. It's me studying myself, of myself navigating around this spaces, around this country, around um, these social structures that are created around me that I wasn't born into. Um, so yeah, identity is really huge on my work, and even my identity as a brown person or living in this body, um, it's part of my work.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's like a very emotional and being able to reveal that layer behind how our identity can speak to its culture and our ancestry. And I'm wondering, would there be any chance or in any under any circumstance you will be uninterested in being identified as Asian American or Filipino American?
Oh, yeah, of course. And this is something that I always talk about um, with my wife, because she's Mexican American. And we always kind of have like this conversations about being Asian, and one of those things is that I'm really embarrassed to be part of is like being part of like the model minority. Um, and seeing the news, um, like the event that happened in the Capitol, how there's a news report saying that there was like a lot of Filipinos that were there, and somebody was waving the Philippine flag, or had like a broomstick that was made in the Philippines. I was really like, I don't want to be associated with that. Um, so yeah, it's hard. And then trying to learn um, all of these toxic Filipino traits that we have. That's a result of colonial colonialism and colonial mentality. It's tough, you know, it's tough, but I am part of it, you know, unfortunately, and I have to do my best to not be like that, or to change myself, or to decolonize myself. Um, and hopefully, um, you know, by me starting with myself, I'm able to be sort of like a um, not really a role model, but as an example by my actions, you know, and the things that I think of and the things that I talk about. That hopefully, you know, things will change, especially for us Asian Americans in our um, role in society.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. And I'm also wondering if you could speak a little bit more about Alif Art House,
Hmm.
which is just like so surreal, like a pop-up shipping container. Like, how did you come up with that idea?
Um, just like with the Filipinx Artists of Houston, it came from a need, you know, that kind of like that itch they just had to scratch, because my family and I moved to Alief when we first got here, um, and kind of like becoming a young adult in Alief and being interested in art. I felt like I was always commuting um, towards, you know, like in town, like, you know, um, like Montrose area, the museum district, and all that. And even if I did that, I didn't really complain about the drive, but um, I was also seeing a lot of amazing things in A-Leaf that needed to be highlighted, you know, like there was so much culture there. There's amazing food. There's always, um, you know, I'm just surrounded by different colors, different languages, um, and different cultures that something the neighborhood needed something to kind of highlight that, and to highlight the people that live there who's contributing to all these amazing things. And because I'm an artist, I felt like art was my way of showcasing that. So from that itch that I needed to scratch, an opportunity came up where I could apply for a fellowship at Diverse Works, and it was called Project Freeway Fellowship. And it's basically um, Diverse Works supporting a project that you can start in your own neighborhood. So I thought that was like um, the best way that I could have that idea, you know, um, kind of become a reality. And so I applied. Originally, I proposed to purchase a backyard shed, and then somebody suggested to me that a shipping container would give me more space for less money, and it also kind of um, and it also um, applies to my art practice of recycling or reusing a lot of materials. So because it is a used shipping container, then I'm able to kind of like, you know, safely say that it still aligns with my art practice and my philosophy with materials. Um, and so I was able to purchase the shipping container, and then I asked um, the International Management District, who is the one managing the Alief Spark Park and Nature Center, um, and they have like community garden there, which I was a part of in 2016. So I already knew the people there. So I asked them, and then they were like excited about it, that I was starting that initiative. And so, yeah, from there, I was able to also meet a lot of artists who are actually well known in town. And I didn't know that they were from Ailey. So, like the whole connection um, just came naturally. And now I'm also meeting a lot of people, and a lot of Ailey residents are also expressing to me that they're so excited to learn about it. Um, and that they hopefully that they could work with the space in the future. I've also worked with nonprofits, um, A-Leaf-based nonprofits, like Hope Clinic. We were planning on doing like a food drive plus a mental health day kind of thing, but it got postponed because of the pandemic. But I've also worked with um, OCA, um, who does a lot of work in the Alief area. Um, and then there's also um, Unipro and Fonz, Texas, who I worked with. So yeah, it's been really exciting. And then I'm also collaborating with Antonio Spui, who has worked with um, with y'all, and they've been an amazing collaborator as well, and in organizing for because we also got a fellowship this year for 2020 with the Art League. It's called Installations, and Antonius proposed to continue the mission of Alief Art House, and they were able to get the fellowship. So that's what we're trying to do until March of this year. So we're showcasing the artists that Antonius and I have picked. So
Absolutely amazing, like the work, and you're able to activate all the art scene and create a space for the creative minds of Houston to come together. Yeah, thank you for all the work that you've done. Um,
thank you.
yeah, and I'm also wondering, as the ecosystem in Houston constitutes of both the community art collaborators, the artists, as well as the like the nonprofits and the museums, such as the Museum of Fine Arts and the CAM, the Contemporary Arts Museum, and so on. Like, what are the kind of more I guess the other institutions that did you try to work with them, and if not, why not?
Um, Regarding Museum of Fine Arts and the CAM, I haven't really had the opportunity to really start a conversation with them. Um, Although I've already spoken with um, one of the curators of the CAM, and she attended one of the events in 2019. Um, I don't know. I guess the opportunity hasn't really risen yet, especially like during the pandemic. Um, but one big institution that I've had a conversation with the help of Bridget as well, is the Manil, um, because I had found an artifact in um, their wing where they have all these oddities and objects. It was a Filipino um, artifact that told a very kind of sad story about um, um, Prince Giolo, who was enslaved and brought to London, and he was exotified, and when he died, well, he was basically displayed or sold as some sort of private property. Um, and so when he died, because he was covered with tattoos from head to toe, that they decided to take his skin off and display it in one of the colleges in Oxford. So they have that, and I've started the conversation with them to kind of like create a programming um, to work with this artifact and to kind of like make this story known within the Houston community and everyone who needs to know it. Um, but yeah, the pandemic really halted a lot of projects, but we've already started the conversation um, and see what we could do with in terms of programming.
Yeah, that would be amazing to kind of open up more dialogues about the country's past. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and next, I'm wondering, what do you think about the representation of Asian American or Asian artists in general in the those largest institutions in Houston, like the CAM, the MFA, the Manil, as we were talking about?
Um, the CAM, I believe the CAM has been more progressive in terms of Asian American representation, but I think in terms of like Museum of Fine Arts and the Manil, it's it's weird. You know, it's hard. It's a hard conversation. I think that needs to be discussed with them, because whenever I go to the Museum of Fine Arts and I try to look for Asian art, I'm always brought to, you know, the antiquity section, and there isn't even like a Filipino section there. Um, and I feel like their collection doesn't really represent the city's population, um, which is sad. You know, Houston is also considered as, I feel like it already surpassed New York, but what they've said is that we're like the third most diverse city in the U.S. And I feel like the Museum of Fine Arts doesn't really um, represent that well, and especially that they're considered as the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston. You know, I feel like their collection needs to be broadened, um, because I also inquired about their collection if they had like Filipino artists, and they didn't have any, even contemporary art, um, which is, you know, which makes me want to just work harder for it. And then the Manila is, you know, of course, I don't know, it's a very, you know, because it's private as well, so it's so hopefully like me having that conversation with the Manila will kind of like open up opportunities for more Asian American representation within that space. Um, you know, especially with what's going on um, regarding representation, regarding being progressive. Um, yeah, they need to catch up if you're gonna ask me.
Yeah, thank you so much, and we really hope for that day to come sooner. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm wondering, so in your opinion, which institution has the best representation and the most progressive representation of the city of Houston?
Are we just talking about like um,
Yeah,
the
like,
Manil,
or just like in
the
generality.
Cal?
Yeah, the CAM, the Station Museum, the Houston Crafts. and the
Mm,
yeah, like among I know um your community organization definitely has added a lot. And I guess outside of your own, what other institution or organization do you see that does the best job in showcasing Asian American artists?
hmm. It would be either um, I think it would either be the CAM and station because I attended I think it was 2 years ago. Wait, no, 3 years ago, I think, 2018. Um, I went to an opening at Station Museum, and it was showcasing Asian Americans, and and one of the artists there was Filipino, and now he's part of our of Filipinx Artists of Houston, Zeus Paredes, and when I saw him at when I saw him in a museum setting, I was really excited and I was amazed that wow, like this artist exists in Houston. And I was able to be introduced to him by a friend who knew of him. And yeah, it's just like how things happen for a reason. You met him 3 years ago. Now he's like, I was just on the phone with him the other day, and we were just talking about like how things are going, regards to studio practice and just being at home during the pandemic. Um, and then with the cam, they've they've already shown um, a lot of Asian American artists before, and yeah, I think it's the two of them. And then of course, what y'all do at Rice is amazing. Being able to archive all of that as well, and being able to archive all the stories. I think it's like such important work, um, because it's almost kind of like a protest in a way, because at this time a lot of, well, since the beginning of colonialism, the first thing they did was to erase their stories, and being able to do that and to continue to do that, I think is a great way of keeping our stories, and and giving the future generations to be able to look back and see who are these people that started paving the way for us now. um, so yeah, thank you for what you do, with the Asian American Archive, because out of all these stories can also work as an inspiration for more creativity in the future. So this is going to get exciting from here on.
Wow, thank you so much for crediting us as part of the art scene. And yeah, like without narrators like yourself and telling stories too, um, myself and most of the time is the right students, the interns who record these stories and be able to hear their ancestors, as most of our interns are Asian Americans, but we do have a lot of other ethnicities, and be able to kind of pass that torch on. It's really amazing for us to learn about history too. So thank you for the narrators and all the previous narrators of the archive. Um, yeah, and I guess going into a more kind of the city-wise, as Houston is more known as like the space city or the city of oil and gas. What do you think that Houston can offer in terms of its art scene on the more broader like the footsteps of arts and culture in America?
um I believe that um, Houston has the money to actually pay for the artists, and be able to really just put away a budget just for the arts and not having to just rely on hotel tax, um, which is good in a way, but it's also problematic because in times like this, where a pandemic happens and we are not able to depend on the oil and gas travels and the hotel occupancies, then the artists are not able to do their work or not be able to survive. And um, a lot of artists have already voiced out this need, including myself, um, that the mayor should just really allocate a protected funding for just for arts alone, because it's always easy to sell the city as most diverse and has like a lot of culture, like, you know because of the people, um and for the people who make the place beautiful, like artists. I think that we as artists also play a very important role in giving that city that character that it needs to be able to sell it to other, you know companies, or to do business here, or to come here to visit Houston for so many reasons. But if you're not able to provide funding or be able to pay the artists for what we do, then it's not really a sustainable system. Um, we recently, I'm in conversation with a lot of artists whose budgets were cut off through Houston Arts Alliance because of COVID, and they're still continually trying to fight for it. And I think HAA is still trying to work their way to really providing or making up for what was taken. Um, and it shouldn't be that case. Um, it's unfortunate that some folks' funding had to be cut off because of the pandemic, when these artists are always showing up and doing their, making sure that their projects get successfully finished with the most capacity that they can. And then, and then to know, and then to learn that they can't be funded is really, disheartening. And it just, yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It's a problem. I hope that, like, there's a lot of um money that needs to be, um like, the priorities of the city regarding funding. I think, like, we could take out some of the funding from the police, and either give it to more tuition for the teachers, or more, not tuition, but more, um more money to pay the teachers for what they do, and what they deserve to be paid, or for the artists to continue doing their jobs. um yeah. I mean, it was even on the news that Houston was one of the cities that was giving a lot of money to the police force. And I feel like there's a lot of ways that we could prevent crime, um, if we could provide other folks the funding, and just really kind of rethink the priorities of the city, and see who really needs it. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that so openly. And like you said, it's so disheartening that a lot of artists are the the most struggling because of yeah, like kind of the bottom pile of the capitalism chain. So it's
Yeah.
definitely very um yeah. And I guess comparing Houston to other cities that is also very vibrant in its arts and culture scene, like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. What about Houston's Asian and Asian American community makes Houston unique?
In terms of the arts,
Yeah, in terms of the art scene.
um, I think what I find great about the Houston art scene and especially like the Asian American artists that we have here is that we're not really trying to compete with either New York or LA. We're trying to make our own scene and we're trying to make our own work that speaks to us. You know, we're not trying to be like them, but we're just trying to pave our own way. Um, and and those are the things that I find great about Houston is that we're really not trying to be like them at all. Sorry, can you close the door, please? In a little bit. Hold on.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah. Um, and and the way we've shown up for each other is also great. You know, um, like one, but I'm only going to talk about like the Filipino art scene or the Filipinos. It's like it's a really toxic trait for Filipinos to have like a crab mentality and try to like let's say this artist is being well known and and instead of like supporting that artist we tend to like create gossip or pull them down. But like for my community at least we're just so supportive of each other, um that it's amazing to see that we're trying to like fight this bad trait that we're known for, especially like within ourselves. And it's just nice to see that progress, especially in community, and then having that community work um, to be included as part of like Filipinx Arts of Houston mission, um, and then branching out to even other Asian American artists. Um, we collaborate with a lot of Vietnamese artists and Chinese artists as well. And then we also show support to their initiatives. Um, like we've worked a lot with like the nonprofit organizations as well, um, like OCA or UniPro Texas, um, and also branching further out into supporting other organizations who are largely focused into Asian American um, initiatives. So yeah, it's great to see and to observe what's going on here because I don't see a lot of like within our communities. I don't see like fighting or anything like that, or someone's trying to be better or anything like that. I just see support, and it's almost unreal, but then that's what I'm seeing, so it's real. So um, yeah, I'm amazed. I'm amazed by the people that we have here because it's really the people um, who's going to make those real changes that we need in society. Um,
Yeah, I totally agree. Just like how amazing that people can connect one another. Like I can just reach out to you, reach out to Antonia's or Bridget or anyone that are so welcoming. to like give their own like creativity and share with the city. Um, and I'm also wondering what are some of the shows that you've seen that has been really stuck to you? I know you mentioned the one that Zeus in, and if I'm not mistaken, the show's name is Indivisible. If that's the one you were thinking about,
I
but
think so, yeah.
yeah, like what are like is there any show that's stuck in your head that that you went to?
Um, I'm not great with titles, so I apologize. Um, for me personally, um, the show by Stephanie Sihuko at the Blaffer Museum was great. I've always looked up to Stephanie's work, and for it to be here in Houston, I think was great. Um, I also admire um, what Rice had put together for the pandemic, which included Brandon in it as well. Um, it really showed like the struggle of Asian Americans, artists specifically, um, and how we were able to like handle all of this, you know, just everything that's happening around us right now. Um, and um, what else? There was one show at the CAM that really spoke to me. Can't remember the title, but it included one of my good friends, Nathaniel Donay. Um, but yeah, it was probably like 3 4 years ago. um, but yeah, but the whole work just spoke to me. Um, and then there was a one show as well by Trenton Doyle Hancock at the CAM. I've always been a big fan of him, and I've had uh, the opportunity of working with him in in his studio and seeing everything just laid out in the museum. I thought was really great, um, and very inspiring. And then another show also at the CAM, that was about the whole concept of incarceration. It was a very heavy show, and it probably took me like 2 days to just go through everything and to process everything. But I thought there was a lot of strong work there that spoke to me. Um, yeah, even Nari Ward's show was wonderful. Um, but yeah,
Wow, thank you. And I guess following that, who are some of your favorite artists in Houston or connected with Houston?
uh, one of my favorite artists. Ooh, that's tough. Um,
Yeah, it's probably a long list, but
yeah,
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 we
it's
totally.
definitely a long list. Um, let's see. Um, just Asian American artists, or
Any artist that you
any artists. Um, oh man. Um, I think one of the artists that I can think of right now is Francis Alamandares, um, and how he uses poetry and sound work and installation work and putting them together. I think is is very inspiring to me because those are things that I don't really delve into yet. So his creativity, and the way of doing storytelling is very fascinating to me. Um, Another artist who I find really exciting, who I've worked with before, is Raymond Compton, who also goes by Kumquat. He's a drag artist, but seeing from all of the videos that he has put together and the theatrics and the live drag show that he had at the Ailey Fart House, I'm really excited, or like I want to like pick on his brain even further and be able to work with him more in the future and just learn, because he's more into theatrics, and that's also something that I don't know a lot about. So, just thinking in that way, I think is very fascinating to me as well. Um, let's see, another artist. Um, everyone that I work with Philippine X Arts of Houston. uh, I
And
might sound a little biased, but they're all great in what they're doing, um, and just seeing like their passion and just being involved in in their journey of even finding themselves artistically, I think is amazing. Um, yeah, I have a long list.
gonna ask you to publish an index for us now.
I could, I
Yeah,
probably could.
yeah. Wow. That was truly amazing. And I guess if you're willing to share, like if we kind of ask you to put a manifesto for the Filipinx artist community, what would you want the archive to remember this group of talented people as?
I I want the archive to remember Philippine X Arts of Houston as a group of Filipino creatives, because we're all artists in our own way, and that being musicians, chefs, in different. So I want the archive to remember them as Filipinos who have worked together so hard, and we still do, into better representing us and our stories the best way that we can, um, that we may be heard, um, in the best way possible. Kind of like forcing our way in, but that's like almost like, you know, um, possibly the only way. Um, but we've existed, and we're here to exist more in the future. So, we're really trying to pave the way for future Filipino artists, and to be able to already create that, um, just that treasure trove of stories of people that they can look up to, people that can guide them, people that can be available for whatever they need to help be that stepping stone for them to achieve the dreams that they want, to be in, especially in the arts, um, and also to be supportive in so many other ways, more than just creating artwork, whether that be, mentally, or have like a family outside of your family kind of thing. Hopefully financially as well. Um, we're also trying to, um, work that into our own community, that artists need to be paid, for their work. Um, and yeah, hopefully this is just the start of something great in the future. Um, Yeah, that's how I want the archive to remember these group of people.
Wow, thank you so much. And I want to use the title of Lumika's 2021 title this year, We're Growing. And I hope that's a message for all of the Asian American art community to work with, yeah, the city and then the Houston's vibrant art scene to, yeah, represent and make it a, yeah, diverse culturally, not only ethnicity. So thank you so much, Matt, and for everyone for all the work that you do. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.